And finally, a bit of joy at Goodison Park. Schadenfreude is the greatest emotion, and when Anthony Gordon steps up with that much arrogance to take the penalty, I do not blame the Everton fans for going mental. Welcome to the Anglo-Italian pod. As always, my name is Rory, and I'm joined by my very good friend Adam. Adam, how are we doing, man?
Yeah, doing very well. Good to see that Erik ten Hag is still in the job, as we currently speak anyway, at least. But more importantly, Rory, how are things in Milan?
All good. A great weekend. Arsenal won and the Alex won. Alex beat top of the table Gillingham with our top goal scorer from last season that they robbed off us. A lovely 2-0 win. So that was really put the icing on the cake. I worried about the season for the Alex, but it looks like we're starting to turn it around. So touch wood, it could be a very good season. But yeah, good weekend. What about you, mate?
Yeah, very good. Very much in a very similar circumstance. Wickham go now 7 games unbeaten. We're kind of on the cusp of being outside of the playoff mix purely because other teams have played a game more than ourselves. But yeah, very confident mood at the moment being a Wickham supporter. So really happy. Let's keep it going. I'm not going to say anything because it's not the magical January or February period where we kind of can start guessing. But, you know, optimistic, definitely, and loving the football. That's more important.
Well, exactly. And it was a great weekend in the Premier League. Some absolute bangers.
Yes.
We had peak Spursiness as Spurs blew a 2-0 lead to lose 3-2 against Brighton. We will be talking about that game. West Ham got back to winning ways with a dominant win against Ipswich Town at home. Calvin Phillips reminding the West Ham fans exactly what type of player he is. We had a goal fest at Brentford. Records broken. 8 different goal scorers and all from different countries in a 5-3 win for Brentford. How much trouble are Wolves in? Liverpool with a very impressive win against Crystal Palace. 1-0 doesn't quite do them justice with that one. And elsewhere, Arsenal got a win. Anthony Gordon made a royal show of himself. Raul Jimenez got the assist of the season. And Aston Villa, Manchester United bored us all to tears. And there was a scrap at the end of Chelsea Forest. So we will try to fit all this in, but we're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about Spurs. We are back, and it is time to talk Brighton and Hove Albion 3, Tottenham Hotspur 2. And I think this is the definition of it's a game of two halves. Let's talk about the first half, and let's be quite kind to Spurs before I properly two-foot them in the second half. But in the first half, as bad as Brighton were, Spurs were good, right? Like we were talking during the game on our WhatsApp group about just how dominant and how comfortable Spurs looked, the style of football they were playing, the chances they were creating. Brennan Johnson scoring in 6 games in a row now, incredible form from him, and just really genuinely very nice to see him enjoying his football, looking clinical, looking confident, and of course James Maddison with the second. How impressed were you with Spurs in the first half? They did everything that you expect from an Ange ball team, right?
Yeah, certainly. I felt like they took the right intensity to the game. You know, they applied themselves really in the manner that I think Ange Postecoglu kind of felt confident going into that second half. You know, he felt like they'd kind of grasped what he's been trying to really get them to get behind in terms of the stylistic style of football. And I think the key thing that I alluded to you in the WhatsApp group chat was the fact that Hurzeler had kind of said that the approach in the Chelsea game, in the previous game, wasn't bad. It was just that they didn't apply themselves with the right pressure, which we kind of were a bit nervous given that they kind of were very much on the counter, taken apart by this Chelsea team without much really attacking impetus. And I felt like the early signs were there to kind of indicate at least that Spurs potentially could go off and win this match quite handsomely. But as they always say, Rory, 2-0 is a dangerous scoreline because unfortunately, especially if you're Spurs, then you are susceptible to goals. I think what I was most surprised at was, given the intensity, the way they applied themselves in the first half, I just thought if they got another one in that first half, I think that would have been game over. I think that would have been very hard for Brighton to have come back into it. But the attitude in the second half was 100% better from a Brighton perspective. I did make a point about the substitution that Brighton did make. So Esteban, who was brought on, I thought is one of those that gives a bit more fight. Certainly, he's a player that's got a lot of pace, tenacity about him. So I think that probably shored up that kind of weakness on that left-hand side, especially as Brennan Johnson was constantly finding himself in amples of space. And I think that was a concern from Brighton perspective. But yeah, I mean, the way that Brighton approached themselves, and I think also the way that Spurs didn't apply themselves as much in the second half. You know, they laid themselves really open. Almost at times, Roy, I mean, you probably slate them, but they were very lethargic, weren't they? They just didn't seem like they were picking up their runners or, you know, the men that they were having to mark. And they made it easy. They made it easy for them. And I think what typified it was the memes that went out after this game of Ange with the background of Brighton fans celebrating and him just going, I can't coach this lot anymore. You know, this is Spursy. This is really what Spurs is all about. He looks a defeated man at full time because I think he's now got to that point where it's like, this is a group of individuals now that still don't get what I'm trying to implement in this team. And I think he thought he cracked it, but I think he's starting to realise that there's still a lot of work to be done at this club.
That shot, it looked like the final scene of like a Nordic crime drama when like the criminals got away and he's just stood there like staring, like with the tie slightly undone and the like forlorn face and just. I thought, Ange, you look like you're just staring off at like the edge of a cliff, just like he got away.
Yeah,
he's like he's beaten me. It just had that complete defeated, and like I know his post matches are often quite. He has a weird thing about not making eye contact with the interviewer, and I don't know if it's only when he loses but the whole thing was just staring at the ground, zero like. I think it's. The job is beating him. I think it is in the process of beating him. Like, I think, not to go too far back, but I think there are certain events during his time that have meant that he's kind of had to re-look at the club. The first one was when the Spurs fans were celebrating City goals going in, and he had to look and be like, and he came out afterwards and was like, I've learned a lot about this club and the people at this club, and I don't like what I've learned, and I'm a winner, and I'm like, and I think that was the first time where he was like, okay, there's something not quite right here. And then he gets it across the players that, like, you know, he is a winner, right? Everywhere he's gone, he has won things. He is like an utter competitor. And then he's tried to get this across, and they've done this. And like, even a lot of the performances, like, I know they won 5 in a row before this, right? But they weren't against the greatest teams. And the performances in bigger games have been like this. They've been massively underwhelming. And it seems like the second there's a little bit of difficulty, a little bit of adversity, the whole thing just falls apart. Like, when Brighton score that first goal, now they score first like early on in the second half, so it's within 5 minutes, isn't it? It's within 3 minutes of the second half they get the goal, right? It's the 48th minute, Minte scores. A terrible mistake from a dodgy. I think he had a terrible game all round, to be honest. He made quite a few mistakes. But when that happens, no part of that team goes, okay, dig in, sensible, slow down, keep the ball, maintain possession. Like, it's like they just accepted the momentum and were like, yeah, this is what happens now. They've scored one, so they're going to win the game. And I think just that lack of any resistance must be incredibly disheartening as a manager, right? Where you're like, guys, come on, you've got, like, I can't pass the ball for you. I can't make the tackle for you. I can tell you what to do, but you have to follow the instructions, right? I think, but also, on the same hand, you look at how late he made those substitutions. So he brings on Pape Sarr and Yves Bissouma on 79 minutes. They're already 3-2 down by that point. And those are substitutions that shore up a midfield. Those are substitutions that you make in the 50th minute. When you go, shit, we've conceded one. Okay, take off Maddison because he's disappeared into fucking thin air. Take off Kulusevski and just shore up that midfield and go, right, we're just going to sit this one out if you have to play haram, bloody terrorism ball, whatever you want to do, just because it's less embarrassing than being the team that have given up 2-0 leads the most in Premier League history. Like, it's just, I thought the lack of resistance to the turn in momentum was just embarrassing. But I think, now obviously everything I say is biased, but that being said, I'm going to report this. I think James Maddison sums up this Spurs team more than any other player at the moment. I think he sums up the flaws in this team. Incredibly showy, really on his day can be an incredible player, right? Really talented, believes he's incredibly talented, but the second there's a little bit of adversity, disappears. I couldn't believe when he came off in the second half, I was like, Christ, I forgot he was even there. He came off on the 85th minute, and I don't think he touched the ball. Like, if you're meant to be one of the marquee players in the midfield, you're meant to be one of the key creative players. You're meant to be one of the players who leads by example. You know, you're the king of your roast dinners, be king of the bloody the field, if you know what I mean. And he just disappears. And I think he sums up a lot of what is wrong with this Spurs team. And if I was a Spurs fan, I would be absolutely fuming with so many of the players on that pitch, but mainly him. I also think the defence, if I hear praise for this defence one more time, the defence doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
Like, individually, they could all be incredible. They're not. They could all be incredible. But as a collective, that is not a good defence. Like, as well as, and we'll get to Brighton, those goals were easy to score.
Easy. So easy.
Like, incredibly easy to score, right?
Yeah. Ridiculously easy. I mean, there's a lot being said about Dodgy, in particular for two of those goals. But Romero in particular, that last one, that was terrible. Bentancur in the build-up to that last goal as well. Turned so easily. But I think you alluded to the point, which is that they are individuals. They are not working collectively as a team. And that's the principle that I think Ange doesn't like, is the fact that they are reliant on certain individuals to help and bail them out at times. But when they need to shore up in terms of the actual game events that happen, they need to work as a collective. You saw that in the Celtic side that, you know, Postecoglu demonstrated when he was playing against, you know, the Champions League opponents, you know, when they're gritty. But you'd never see this in a Spurs side. There always seems to be this element, and I know a lot of criticism is aimed towards Postecoglu for the tactics, but as you've pointed out in the North London derby, no amount of training or anything that you say to a player before the match can be influenced by Postecoglu when those events happen on the pitch. It is down to those individuals to pick up the men, to do the basics, to make sure that they're calling out their teammates. And they just didn't do any of that. And I think you're right to kind of even call out Maddison. He wasn't the one that I've seen that has been called out, but I've been feeling this for a long time, that I think Spurs fans were under the illusion that, Postecoglu's found the spot that actually works for this Spurs side. But actually, I kind of think back, Rory, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but Leicester City fans weren't too gutted when they sold him. That says a lot to me about the principle of they knew that this was an element of his game that they weren't going to miss. And whilst he has those moments, once every 10 games now, Rory, that you see him actually stand out in a game. And they're not necessarily in games where you think, you know what, he needs to be getting himself involved or he makes himself counted. I just don't see it. I think in the grand scheme of things, you know, I've always said this about this Spurs side. They are a team of individuals that are waiting to be trained up to the next level. They're not the ready or finished article in many respects. They haven't got that mentality. And I think also another point that you made about Postecoglu being a winner, Jose Mourinho was brought there. He's the one, he's already alluded it many a time, that this is the one of the clubs that he failed to resonate with their fan base. He really struggled in terms of getting an impression, and yeah, the circumstances didn't help themselves, but certainly there's something about being at Tottenham that doesn't seem to get the best, and that's despite the infrastructure, the spend, everything around them. You know, it's so strange, Rory. But in terms of the game,
I'm trying not to laugh because
terrible.
I'm trying not to like. I'm trying to push down the Arsenal fan in me and be like, no, there's genuinely like, what is this issue that the club has beyond it's just Spurs? But like, I think this just typifies a lot of their performances and a lot of the issues within that club. But let's talk about Brighton because I think
they deserve
as bad as they were first half, they were very good second half. And what I really liked about the post-match with Hurzeler was when he said, no, I didn't change anything tactically. I didn't change a single thing tactically. I said, you just have to be willing to put in the yards and do the work. And I think Danny Welbeck alluded to it as well in the post-match where he said players like Milner and Jason Steele, who are like the maturer or kind of more experienced players within the changing room who aren't starters, but they turned around and said, boys, this isn't good enough. You're not going to get an easy game in the Premier League. You can't just coast through this. And the rocket that they came out with in that second half, I think seeing a player like Mitoma, this is the first time I've been excited by Mitoma again in a while. I feel like he's not really hit those levels since maybe early last season because he had a big injury, right? I think before that injury, I've not really seen him back at this level, but that was a game where you were really like, he had Porro all over the place, just like running, turning, like, his dribbling, everything. Really incredible performance from him. Of course, got an assist. And Yacouba Mente is a player that, like, when they signed him from Newcastle, I was like, they've done very well here. And obviously, this is his first goal for Brighton, but again, a player that looked an absolute threat in the second half, especially. And then Rutter is like a really weird one because I think Leeds fans weren't disappointed when he left. I think they didn't really like him from what I remember. They kind of thought he was overpriced, a bit of a flop. He got 10 goals in the Championship last year, like not a massive amount, but it looks like Brighton are unlocking him a little bit. Like, again, this is his first goal for the club as well, I think, or in the Premier League at least. So it's kind of a bit of a monkey off his back as well. And then what I like is the sheer number of wingers they have as options. But then now they have Welbeck. Now, obviously, they've been forced through the João Pedro injury, but Welbeck just being that guy, right, up front and just being the constant, he had a chance he should have scored in the first half. Yeah. But I think that front four in the second half were just absolutely incredible and just finally, like, showed what they could actually do in terms of just causing teams problems, right?
Yeah, 100%. You got that spot on in terms of the way they approach themselves. But it goes to a point that I think sometimes managers, they overcomplicate it by changing the philosophies, changing the styles. And Hurzeler's really thought about that it's not necessarily the game plan that's wrong, it's the way it's been applied sometimes. And I think that's possibly true of that first half because you could see that they weren't just applying themselves. They weren't putting the pressure on this Spurs side. And that's what I suppose at times Spurs were just finding it very easy to penetrate through this Brighton side. I think to that point, in the second half, they came out fighting. And in terms of those attacking threats, as you alluded to, Mitoma was having a great game. I'd have to say I did notice his form pickup in recent games. Maybe we just haven't been able to focus on it as much, but there was signs of it in previous games that I thought, wow, we're getting the Mitoma of old. But yeah, you are right to allude to the fact that, when you look at this Brighton side, they are having to kind of rely on certain individuals like Danny Welbeck to pull through those performances, but he's stepping up. He's being the kind of main focal point for them. And I was surprised, I thought he might have been one of those that might have been moved on in the summer, but he's done superbly well to stick at it and provide kind of that impetus for this team as well, because without him, I don't know if they would necessarily go out and grind out that result in particular. But Rutter as well, he's an interesting character. It's fair to say. You're right to allude to the fact that he wasn't fancied. I remember there was a Sam Allardyce quote that came about when he was there briefly, if you remember. And apparently the board had pushed Rutter on him and he said, he's not good enough. And I appreciate there's a stigma around Sam Allardyce in terms of like the style of football. But even he could see that he didn't think he was ready for that level. And that says a lot. I think the fact that he's matured in the last season to get himself that big money move. And yeah, a lot of money's been spent on him. So that's a hell of a gamble. But Minte, again, what a bargain he seems already. Like, that's a fantastic bit of business. I think the only criticism that I'd have of this Brighton side is they're still susceptible at the back. You know, even with Igor, who we know from his Fiorentina days, is not the most agile. I'll be brutally honest, but yeah, I think also, I think the likes of Veltman were very lucky at times. You know, some of the fouls that they're giving away, Van Heck as well. Yeah, I think on another day, yeah, they could be on the wrong side of the law there. But yeah, credit to the way that Brighton went about the business. Yeah, they definitely deserved it in that second half for sure.
Yeah, they're going to be a lot of fun this year, Brighton. They're just going to be a lot, like, there's going to be goals in their games because they can't
Yes.
defend and they really attack.
Yeah.
But I think I just really enjoyed this game, and it was, it was Brighton kind of back to their best in the second half. And any chance to laugh at Spurs, I'm always quite happy with. But let's leave that there because there will be neutrals who are begging me to shut up. So let's leave Spurs in their misery there. And let's move on to the next game as we go to talk about... well, Brentford took their time. It took them 2 minutes this week to score. They're lacking as Nathan Collins got the first goal. This game was 3-2 within half an hour, right? 28 minutes.
Yeah,
Brentford were 3-2 up. Absolute chaos. But ultimately, Brentford eased to a 5-3 win. I think 5-3 makes it look closer than it actually was in reality. Yeah. But Adam, talk us through this. Let's go at it from a Brentford angle before we talk about Wolves. Brentford and these early kickoffs, what I love about Thomas Frank is that he's still finding ways to be creative and find new ways to get marginal gains. Despite being in charge at Brentford for so long and being in the Premier League for so long now, he's still coming up with new ways to find advantages, right?
Certainly. I think what was the most telling was, I suppose, he's adopted this inverted centre-back kind of piece. The likes of Van der Berg, Collins, for example, being able to push in to those kind of midfield areas with the ball and causing, I suppose, a disruption to Wolves' type of game. Because I think they're quite happy to sometimes sit back and be behind the ball at times. However, by having centre-backs that were so far advanced into their part of the pitch meant that there was more chaos in the kind of latter half of the pitch, in particular that kind of final third. And I think that created a lot more work for the Wolves defence, who we know haven't been the most stable of late. And they're just easy to concede and score goals against. But there was some terrible defending from a lot of these goals. And I think if you probably saw signs for the very first time of Wolves fans now having enough. You could sense it, even when that final goal was scored by Wolves, there was such a silence around the ground because, it is quite telling. I think, it wasn't very loud for Gary O'Neill chants yet, but I think one more result, and I think you'll start hearing the Wolves fans really letting it known. But I mean, that was superb from a Brentford perspective. The way they approached it, and yes, they did have to wait a few more seconds compared to the last few kickoffs. But it goes to show you they've got a system that works, and the fact is, they are imaginative on the ball. Damsgaard, again, superb in this match. The set pieces that he put on for the various goals, in particular Pinnock's goal I put out here as well. I couldn't work out what the Wolves defence were doing. They were all kind of bunched up in the middle, and then you had Ethan Pinnock at the back post by himself. Just no one there to kind of mark him, and he had a free rein at goal, should I say. So I suppose, it's a bit of a concern. But one of the things I was going to pose to you, Rory, was I've said on this pod I didn't feel like Wolves have spent a lot of money. But do you want to guess how much they've actually spent this summer? Because I was actually shocked that they've spent this amount of money. But do you want to guess how much they've spent?
Andre from Fluminense, or whatever it was, they spent loads of money on, didn't they? I'm going to say 120.
Bit less.
Ooh.
So it's actually 69 million.
Oh, really? We lads.
So
69 million.
It's
Wow,
not
right,
bad,
okay,
but that's more than I anticipated personally.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those that you kind of think about it. 10 million was spent alone on Johnston, the goalkeeper from Crystal Palace at the time. So, I think there's some concerns around that kind of transfer policy as well. Stroud Larson as well, who's been a good signing for them. He got a goal in this match, 15 million from Celta Vigo. I just think a lot of the signings that they've brought in are kind of roll of the dice, hope that he'll turn out good and create a profit for the actual club. But I think there is general concern about that they haven't necessarily replaced the players. Now, it's very hard to replace like a Pedro Neto, for example, but to get someone that could do a Max Kilman job, I'm sure there's a lot of defenders out there that they could have gone into the market and bought in. So yeah, a lot of concern for Wolves, but from a Brentford perspective, that was fantastic. And I think that is the kind of confidence that you need for this part of the season to get those kind of results against these kind of teams. They're the kind of points that you want to get on the board as soon as you can and help your season out. So I've got no concerns, but I think same questions as last week, really, Rory, around Wolves. And I don't know how far long it is until O'Neill has probably shown a door.
Yeah, I still feel like this squad and this team are good enough to stay up. I think players like Strand-Larsen, Lamina, Andre, Semedo, Nori, Cunha, I don't think the goalkeeper needed replacing, but Johnston is a decent keeper.
Yeah.
There's enough there that you should be getting more out of this team. I know they've lost Kilman, I know you've lost Neto, but there is more there. So I think at this point, it's a matter of when O'Neill gets sacked rather than if. It's the international break now. There is another one in November, so maybe they really hold their nerve and go, let's see where we're at in November and see if, we can really, if it does turn it around. But I think they need a new energy in there. They need someone who's going to change a bit of something. And I think the managers that are kind of available, you're looking basically at David Moyes or Graham Potter. So which direction do you want to go into? Do you want to go into the expert that's going to keep you in the league, but it's not going to be particularly fun to watch in David Moyes? Or are you going to go for, okay, we might go down, but he's a manager that can progress us long-term maybe in Graham Potter? So I think those are the two that are getting linked to every job. Those are the two that I would expect one of them to be in charge of Wolves before the end of the season. I just feel like it's unfortunate for Gary O'Neill. He came in with did a great job at Bournemouth, impressed everyone on Sky Sports, had a really good season with Wolves last year, but I think he's been hamstrung by the ownership as well. The ownership definitely haven't helped. But yeah, I think it's just time for a bit of a new face there, maybe, because it all looks a bit sour. I still like Andre as a player. I think within a few years, people are going to be talking about him. He is a fantastic player. And I think we just need a bit more of a cohesive team around him in that midfield.
Yeah.
But Brentford, fantastic. And Damsgaard, I've forgotten that he was at Brentford, honestly. He was fantastic at Sampdoria. I was delighted to see him doing so well for Brentford. 2 assists for him. But my God, basically the whole team got involved. Every single player has got a mark of an assist or goal next to them on this team sheet. But one player, obviously, we can't talk about Brentford without talking about Brian Mbeumo. He now has 6 goals in the Premier League. He is 25 years old, still relatively young, still is better years ahead of him. I really think a team should be looking at this guy. I can't believe he's not gone yet. I'm sorry, Brentford. I keep trying to sell your players, but this guy is an absolute machine. And he's just having, I think, his best season in the Premier League since he's been here. And maybe the fact that even Tony isn't there anymore and he's kind of the main man is just making him step up a little bit more, but really, really impressed by him. So fantastic from Brentford. 8 goals, all different players, all different nationalities. Absolutely lovely. Yeah. The World's League, the Premier League. Absolutely love it. Let's move on to the next game and let's go down. Let's stay in London. Should we stay in London?
Can do.
Let's stay in London and we're going to East London as we talk West Ham 4, Ipswich 1. Another team who scored in the first minute. They got in there quicker than Brentford this week. Mikel Antonio, I saw a fantastic tweet from a West Ham fan this week that was like, every season, West Ham go out and try and find a striker. And within 6 weeks, we end up just sticking Mikel Antonio up front and he does a better job. But it works every time, Adam. Why? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, I think they've been saying this for the last 6,
10
7 years. Yeah, I mean, Mikel Antonio, when he first came to the club, wasn't even meant to be playing up front. That shows you how much he's diversified as a player. I'm pretty sure he's played every position bar goalkeeper, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, that is testament to him. I think the problem is you need a certain type of striker for West Ham. You need someone that is reliable, and I think he does a lot of the dog work. He does a lot of the chasing down, and that's what I think embodies like a lot of the managers to get behind him as well, because he does all of the pieces that certain strikers struggle to do. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily anticipate like a Danny Ings to do that kind of performance, but yeah, I think West Ham were rewarded in this particular match, should I say, for the way they went about it. And it's the first time possibly that we saw the very best of a Lopetegui's West Ham side, because they've been unlucky in recent games, that they haven't necessarily got the results. For example, the previous game against Brentford, and then the previous to that was Liverpool in midweek in the Carabao Cup. And, there were already kind of signs to suggest that they were on the upward trajectory anyway. But yeah, I think they were handed this kind of victory courtesy of Ipswich. I think they were just a bit naive at opportunities in certain positions. And obviously we'll allude to Calvin Phillips and his kind of defending. I don't know if it was defending, but it was certainly highlights his decline, should we say, Rory, especially the way he was taken for Jared Bowen's effort. I know there's a lot being made out of the fact that Jared Bowen looks up and sees it's Calvin Phillips, so decides to take it almost 250 degrees inside before he places a shot. I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not too sure that's
I'm not sure he looked and went, oh, good, it's Calvin, I'm going to run. Like, yeah. I don't think that's what happened. I mean, there's a lot of West Ham fans really sticking the boot in there. But friend of the show, Tom, who is a West Ham fan, we have constant debates about Bielsa because he thinks Bielsa's a reckless idiot and I think he's a god amongst men, right? And so we constantly have this kind of conversation. And he just messaged on WhatsApp and was like, I'll tell you what, Bielsa's greatest ever achievement is making Calvin Phillips look like a footballer because he's like, that guy is absolutely terrible. It reminded me of that meme, oh, this is the exact thing we didn't want to happen. And it's like Calvin Phillips just making a massive mistake within the first minute of a game and just absolutely nothing seems to be going right for the fella. I feel like he's been better since he got to Ipswich. He's been a little bit more that's steady or whatever, but obviously just this occasion of going back to the kind of scene of the crime was a bit too much for him. But I wanted to kind of talk about the score sheet for West Ham because it's kind of interesting. Obviously, there's been a lot of rumblings about Kudus and fallings out in the background, and he attended a game at the Emirates the other week. He was at the Emirates. But he was on the score sheet, as was Bowen, as was Paquetá. Now, these are all you're looking at those 4 players that scored, and those are the 4 key players for West Ham, really, in an attacking sense, right? So it's good for them to all, it kind of feels like get their season started because it hasn't really started yet.
Yeah. No, I think that's the thing. I think they've been waiting for the moment when they can all blend in and contribute at the very same moment. I think that's what, every team kind of, when they build up a squad, they want certain individuals. They see 1 or 2 and they're like, oh, it's a shame that one's injured or that one's out of the squad. And for the very first time, maybe we're starting to see when they're together, then they can play to the plan that the manager wants, for example. So I think that definitely played a part. But like I say, I think Ipswich played into their hands at very moments. I think naivety was the key here. Liam Delap, I thought, was unlucky in this particular match because he had an effort that was ruled off as well. So had that gone in, potentially you could say that could be a different scoreline. But yeah, just those errors really that lead to the goals. I think that really killed off Ipswich and maybe a sense of reality for Ipswich in that respect because they've been doing quite well up until this point. I think it was like four draws, wasn't it? I think leading up to this game. So yeah, they've been doing quite well. So yeah, but I think that's a huge opportunity for West Ham to now build momentum. I suppose the only downfall is it's international week, so they can't really build on that until another week's time. But yeah, certainly it allows or takes off the heat off Lopetegui, because I think there was a lot of skepticism about him and his appointment, and this allows him to push on potentially, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely massive. They were four games without a win, and now they've got that win. I think it was like a really nice fixture to have, like, with all due respect to Ipswich, a very nice fixture to have before the international break. Like, Ipswich at home, Southampton at home are probably going to be your easiest games of the season, so it's really important the West Ham win that and win it convincingly. And yeah, Antonio on the score sheet, always love to see it. Let's leave that game there and let's go to... I think we're staying in London. Should we go Crystal Palace 0, Liverpool 1? I feel like this was one of the more interesting games, despite there only being one goal. Because there was a few talking points here that I thought were quite interesting. If we start from the Liverpool point of view, I find it really... Now, obviously, Liverpool have had a bit of a kind start to the season, right? They've not really played any big teams, and I'm including Manchester United there, right? And they've had quite a gentle start to the season. But that being said, they're winning games really comfortably and really routinely for like a new manager. Usually there's you don't know who's in the starting lineup. You don't quite know what the system is. You don't know what they're trying to learn or what they're trying to... This is just like, it kind of feels like Klopp is still in charge, but it's a bit slower. And I think that's the biggest compliment I can give to Liverpool and to Slot at the moment is the way they've handled so far this transition from one legacy manager to a new manager has just been really seamless. And this performance, as much as Crystal Palace probably should have equalised, this was a very, very comfortable win for Liverpool and a very comfortable performance. Are you impressed by how it's all just quite steady, right?
Yeah, it's very seamless. On your point about Arne Slot being almost like a Klopp, he certainly had the excuses at full time about the fixture schedule list, especially 12:30 kickoff time. So, got to hand it to him. He's clearly been learning from Klopp. Maybe he left him a handbook on the side. 12:30, tell them to do one, basically.
By the way, please do not shut up about 12:30 kickoff. That is my legacy. Please do not shut up about it.
Please continue my good work. But I think one part of it is how well they were drilled under Klopp. And, Arne Slot hasn't had to maybe tinker necessarily. I think he's got a good base of players there. I think there was signs in the Nottingham Forest match to kind of suggest that maybe he was still trying to work out maybe how they approach certain games, for example. And I think he's still not been totally convinced by the role of Trent Alexander-Arnold. So I think he's adapted him back to his usual position, for example. But yeah, I think the blend of players, they've got the right frame of mind, right mentalities. So certainly from my point of view, I think there's that maturity within this squad. That Klopp left a good legacy in terms of the squad. So Arne Slot hasn't had to drastically improve things. But what he's been able to do, I think, is add a different dimension to their game. I think they're seeing out games better, essentially, than Klopp, because I think with Klopp's style of football, they were certainly a lot more open. So there would have been a lot more open kind of goals, for example, being conceded, last-minute goals, which was kind of a tenacious point with Klopp as well when they were conceded. And, he was kind of rammed down his throat about the fact that he just didn't see out games. So, yeah, I think Slot has added something to Liverpool's game. But yeah, I think the same old issues have cropped up. Injuries, for example, Becker's injury looks interesting because that looks like that could be at least a minimum of a month out. And yeah, I think McAllister was another one, hamstring. He went off at half time, if I remember rightly. So yeah, I suppose that could have an impact in terms of their season. I think the concern here, Rory, is about Crystal Palace now. I don't know necessarily if they did well, but they had moments, right?
The game will kind of now within 30 seconds, Eddie Nketiah's got the ball in the back of the net, but he's offside, and it's a tight offside. Well, is it a tight offside? He's offside, and it's just a bit too eager, and it's a bit like, but if that's onside, it's a completely different game, and you've got something to defend, and you think, okay, that's a positive start, but then. What I think is the issue for Crystal Palace, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, is that Wharton is clearly not at full fitness, and everything they do seems to go through him. So it stilts everything down, it slows everything down. There's a big gap between the defense and the defense and the attack because there isn't that link. I feel like the defense is still figuring itself out. You've got Lacroix, who's coming into the league for the first season, who looks decent. He looks like a decent defender. Like, he will be very good. And you've got Chalobah, who came in last minute on loan from Chelsea. You got Gahey, who was happy to stay at Palace, is happy to stay at Palace, but had a pretty big summer in terms of, am I going to be here? Am I not going to be here? I think there's quite a lot of disruption around that defense. And I think Glasner doesn't really quite know what he wants to do with this team. Because obviously Elise going is huge, right? You've got 10 goals and 6 assists or whatever from last season missing now. But Eddie Nketiah up front on his own, not really enough presence. What I did like was when he brought on Jean-Philippe Mateta, it gave them the opportunity, like, they could hold the ball up. The ball would go forward and it would stay there. But then he pushes Nketiah out to the left, and Nketiah on the wide isn't really effective. I think there could be a future for a front two of like Nketiah and Mateta, and then Eze behind them. Could be a good little, could maybe be worth trying. So you got the kind of traditional big man, little man, and then like the creative guy behind him, right? The other issue for Palace is that their wing backs don't suit the system. I don't think Tyreek Mitchell is a wing back. I think his attacking output just isn't good enough. It isn't of the level. He's much like defensively, I like him. I think he's a good player. I just think he hasn't got that ability going forward. And then Munoz getting injured, I think, again, it's just like they've got some injuries, Palace, but him going off quite early then meant that Nathaniel Klein comes on and he's 30, whatever. And I just think in Glasner's system, you rely on the wing backs quite heavily, and they just haven't got enough quality there in those positions. So I think 100%. He's still... The owners will be disappointed that he's not figured it out yet, because he had half of last season when they did so well, that maybe he hasn't been able to adjust to Elise going. I think that will be a disappointment. Again, this is another team. No, I don't know who I think is going to go down, because I keep giving these teams excuses. But I look at this Palace team and I think that's too good to go down. Like, there's so much quality in that team. But I also think they just rely on Eze too much. If Eze doesn't do anything, then nobody does anything. I think Glasner really needs to figure it out and quickly, because it could be, we were joking about Roy Hodgson, but it could be another one who's competing for David Moyes or Graham Potter, right? Because 100%. There's just not enough progress at the minute, and he's not learning quick enough how to address these problems. But if it wasn't for the goalkeeper who came on, Yaros, Palace should have scored. Like, they had 2 or 3 opportunities where they were through on goal one-on-one.
Should have had a penalty as well.
Yeah. And there should have been a penalty, which is just like, if they come out and West Ham don't get it the other week, but then the referees afterwards say it should have been a penalty because it's... And then they say it was a fleeting... It wasn't a penalty because it was a fleeting grab. What's the definition of fleeting? Was it 0.5 of a second? 0.6 of a second? 0.3 of a second? Ridiculous. A second? Like, what is your... Don't give us semantics. You've got to give us a definition of... Because the ball's going across the goal. Grahey's going to meet it, or at least get close to it.
Yeah.
And Van Dijk just pulls him back. I couldn't believe that wasn't a penalty, honestly. So I think,
do you know what?
On a different day, Palace get a result.
I was just going to add, if Tarkowski, he clearly bundles Tonali down to the ground for that particular game. There's very much similarities with this one. I appreciate that one.
The Tarkowski one was a lot more wrestling, WWE
more
throwdown.
Aggressive. I grant you that, but however, still the mannerism is still there. He's trying to pull him off his game, and I think if you're doing that deliberately to someone in the box, it's a clear pen. That's the way I look at it. That's a clear foul. You've got no intention of trying to win the ball, regardless of whether you think that's something that's acceptable in the box and that's acceptable kind of behaviour. I think you're asking for troubles personally as a defender if you're giving away those kind of fouls. So I don't see how that's not given.
Yeah, no, it blew my mind, honestly, it blew my mind. So on a different day, Palace do get a result here, but we have to say, credit Liverpool for getting the result. They continue. They've still only conceded 2 goals this season, which is absolutely crazy.
Mad, isn't it?
Scored 13, conceded 2. Incredible start of the season for them, but I would say their October and November look absolutely horrendous. So that is going to be the test for them, I think. Let's move on to the last game we're going to talk about, maybe penultimate game we're going to talk about. Let's go for... There was no goals, but I really enjoyed the moment of this. Everton 0, Newcastle United 0. This game was they proper fucking hated each other. There was so much spite in this game, so much anger. The fans were properly up for it. And just for the moment of Anthony Gordon missing the penalty. Now, I have no dog in this fight. I don't mind Anthony Gordon. He's a little bit irritating when you play against him, but I've got no real beef with him. But the look on his face when he's like, I'll take it. I'll have it. I'll have it. I was so happy when he missed it because I just thought the arrogance of that moment. Like, how did you see it? I just thought Everton fans must have been so happy when that happened.
Well, yeah, they pretty much made themselves known that they hated his guts, didn't they? The amount of superlatives that they threw at Anthony Gordon in terms of like how much they hate him. But yeah, I don't necessarily hate that. I think that's a good kind of confidence to have. I think obviously he was waiting for a moment to ram it down their throats as well. So I think, look, he took on dog's abuse. We don't know the full extent. There's a lot of rumoured kind of aspects to the departure at the time. One alluding to the fact, if you notice, Decore jumping quite vividly in his face. By all accounts, there was a bit of a tussle between them two, which is the reason why he left in the dressing room. And he was omitted from the squad prior to Lampard's departure, and he was reintroduced under Sean Dyche. So maybe that goes to play a little bit in terms of that history between them two. But yeah, it was a feisty game. I think that's the best way to describe it. You know, you had the Dan Burns incident on Calvert-Lewin as well. Should that have been a penalty? But yeah, moments for both sides. I think it was a really open game. You know, I suppose Everton unlucky not to have gone ahead in this match. Decore was offside for his initial header. But yeah, I think, you know, there's endless opportunities for Newcastle. Gordon could have had a hatful on the day, in fairness. You know, he should have done better with some of the opportunities. I did feel that Tonali was a bit overrun in that middle of the park, and I think there was a concern from a Newcastle perspective to say that they are very reliant on the likes of Isak and Wilson, and obviously if Gordon was to get injured, I think then that would really screw up their season because, you know, they're having to rely on the bare bones of their squads at the moment. So it's not looking too pretty from that point of view. I think one positive from an Everton point of view is how resurgent they have been in recent games, how they've kind of shown a lot of determination and grit in the games. But it's not going to be helped, Rory, when Tarkowski's throwing people in the box. That's all I'm going to say. His defending of late has been absolutely atrocious. And, you know, I'm not a fan of Michael Keane, but he's not doing that in the box either. No. I don't know what is going through his head at the moment when he's doing these kind of actions, because that is just giving opposition a chance to win games. But one credit as well, Ndai. What a player he's already shown.
Unbelievable.
Incredible. He saved off the line that he didn't even know he'd done it. So that was
like a back heel off the line clearance. It was incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's a really exciting player, isn't he? I think it's just completely brain dead from Tarkowski. And if Michael Keane does that, he gets absolutely battered online. I think it's just incredibly brain dead. But Everton do hold on for a point. They are unbeaten in 3 matches. Things are looking a bit better. They're on 5 points, 2 points ahead of the relegation zone. Promising signs for the Toffees. Let's go up to Manchester and let's talk about Manchester City 3, Fulham 2. Two moments to talk about here, I suppose, really. Assist of the season from Raul Jimenez, a half volley back heel. Oh my God, it's just incredible. I wanted to put it as our goal of the week on our Twitter and just change it to assist of the week. I think I should have done it because it was just absolutely outrageous. But we wanted to talk about Jimenez, right? Because he's starting to, well, no, he's not starting to. He's continuing this form now. It looks like this could be sustained and back to almost, or is it back to his best? He's looking very, very dangerous.
I think so. I think he's got the full trust of Marcus Silva behind him. You know, last season, I think Silva persevered with him because he knew what type of player he was. And I think this is the first time we've seen Jimenez since that bad injury that he sustained. I think it was against Arsenal, if I'm not mistaken, that many moons ago for Wolves. And show what he did in that early promise with Wolves. I mean, the kind of contribution that he had as a hold-up player, but also being able to score those goals, get himself into the positions that, I think the defence in this particular game really struggled against him. They really didn't know how to handle him. And that's credit to Jimenez in terms of the way he's applying himself. But as you're right to allude to, he's been showing that in the previous games as well. He's been a threat, and he's definitely a player that seems to be running on a lot of confidence at the moment. So, to kind of have the audacity, Rory, to even do that as an assist, just to try and set up his opponent in the way that he did. It was just incredible. But yeah, a few more words have to be given to Adama Traore because he could have killed the game off for Fulham multiple times. He's got the pace, he's got the strength. The only thing he doesn't have to his Arsenal is the finishing ability, Rory. And if he could have that, that is why, the likes of Barcelona had him on his books. There was so much hope with this guy. If only he could finish chances, right?
If he could finish, he'd be on the Ballon d'Or list, I swear. Like, if he could, because he's got everything else an athlete needs, everything else a footballer needs, he just cannot finish. And it's him and bloody Timo Werner. You just think they must be the most frustrating players to watch play for your team. Yeah, there's always time for Spurs to catch a stray. I'll always stick another dig in. But, honestly, Adama Traore is just so frustrating. I think Pep Guardiola giving him what I think are quite passive-aggressive, patronising Pep talks after a game it's always a bit odd, isn't it? But for Manchester City, positives and negatives. Positives, Kovacic has stepped into the Rodri role and now scores goals, which is what Rodri does as well. So they've found that kind of replacement almost. Doku with a great goal to seal the win in the end. But is there a concern for Manchester City that they've gone behind in their last two home games now? They're not looking as assured as they would do in the past. Is this a game that maybe they got away with one here and in other circumstances they might not?
I think so. I think they are. Yeah, there's kind of a line, isn't there, at the moment that they're treading very carefully at the moment. I think he's not helped by the form of Kyle Walker at the moment. I think he's been turned inside out quite regularly now. I did kind of say that this is the season that Rico Lewis gets integrated. I think it's a question mark whether he can do that right now. But I think, there seems to be some solidity issues at the moment. They're really open at the back, which is probably a concern for Pep Guardiola, given that not necessarily are they scoring as many as they probably would like to in certain matches. But I think that all goes down to the fact that they are missing that influence in Rodri. Rodri, I think, does a lot more than what his role as a midfielder entails. And I think they're finding this out through the fact that they've got Mateo Kovacic. And what a great performance it was, but equally, he's not the same as Rodri. I don't think there's many players that you could say are on the same caliber in terms of ability as Rodri. So that says a hell of a lot. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they progress around this for the time being. But for now, I think it's just a question that they might have to do a bit like Inter and go back to basics. Maybe do focus on the basics that help them grind out these kind of results. And possibly that's what they need to find is a winning formula, Rory.
Nice. And very quickly, before we do a little bit of England chat and international break, Chelsea drew 1-1 with Nottingham Forest. Chris Wood opening the scoring. Madueke equalising, and then Ward-Prowse doing a Grandpa Simpson in and out, sent off. Straight away, bit of a eventful cameo from him. We had Arsenal. They beat Southampton 3-1 at home. Archer opening the scoring before Arsenal finally decided to wake up, and in the end it was pretty comfortable. Bukayo Saka gets 2 assists and a goal. He is in incredible form. That's 7 assists for him already this season. It should be 8, but one of them was an own goal, but we'll take 7. And Leicester beat Bournemouth 1-0. Buonanotte getting the goal there. A very exciting player, Buonanotte. Every time I see him, he looks very, very lively. On loan from Brighton, a player that I think we could see in Brighton's lineup next year. Very, very exciting. And in the worst game in living memory, Aston Villa 0, Manchester United 0. I put on the last 10 minutes of this and was bored to tears. And all the commentators were talking about were just how bad the game had been. Yeah. Like, all the commentary was just like, this has been terrible. My God. This has been an hour of this. And I think it was Jamie Carragher on that one? He was like, just blow the whistle, ref. Just end it. Just end it, please. It was absolutely atrocious. But as Ten Hag was keen to point out, Manchester United now have 4 clean sheets in 7 games, which is a mad statistic when you actually think about it.
How has he achieved that? Houdini, basically, levels.
Unbelievable. Right? But, keeps him in a job for another, hopefully, couple of months. So we will not complain. Guys, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to come back and talk all things Three Lions and international break. We are back, and it is time to talk about all things international football. Are you excited about the international break, Adam? I know I am.
Yay! I can't wait.
And for all good news fans, there's another one in November. I cannot wait. Well, let's look at the squad. The only real talking points really are Dominic Solanke called up for the first time in 7 years, which is pretty mental. It looks like Morgan Gibbs-White is going to have to pull out through injury. But overall, Adam, this is just a bit straightforward international break, no fuss for England, right? Greece and Finland. Anything to say?
I think Lee Carsley is going to stick with the formula that helped him in the previous international round of games. Obviously, he's tried to experiment a little bit with the squad as well in terms of personnel. I think he's quite happy with the group of players that he's got right now. The only other one that I would have said it in addition to the ones you shouted out was Dean Henderson, but I don't think he's likely to displace Jordan Pickford. I think that's more on merit of his performances for Crystal Palace. It'll be very interesting to see how much we see more of Angel Gomez in that midfield centre role. And it'll be question mark potentially to see how he can integrate Cole Palmer, because he was missing from the last round of internationals. I know this is easier to a degree opposition, perhaps, in Finland again, and obviously Greece. Greece might be a bit of a tougher opposition given that that's away. But otherwise, Ollie Watkins also called up into the squad to provide a bit of cover for Harry Kane, because last time around, Harry Kane was the only known striker within the squad. So, I suspect Carsley's going to play it nice and safe. And, I'm totally expecting that England should win these 2 games quite handsomely, or at least win them, and then job done, right, Rory?
Yeah. No, it should be fairly comfortable. I think, the only thing is how he fits in Cole Palmer. I think he has to play him ahead of Foden, really, and just see where he can kind of build that front three of, Saka, Cole Palmer, and another. But it'll be interesting to see. Beyond that, it should be fairly straightforward for England, hopefully. I've just realised I'm going to have to sit and watch Ireland again, and this is going to break my soul. But that's about all the enthusiasm we can build up for the international break at the moment. So, guys, we are going to let you go. We hope you enjoyed yourselves. Adam, anything to say before I send the listener home?
No, keep up the love for our social media channels like TikTok and YouTube. We've been getting some great words and comments there. So keep sharing our podcast to many of you and your friends and family. But otherwise, we will see you on the other side of this international break, hopefully talking very minimal amounts, Rory, and talking about the upcoming league games in the Premier League, as well as don't forget this Serie A edition as well.
Go and listen now. It was a great weekend in Serie A. Honestly, there was more goals than in the Premier League.
Much more exciting.
It was a great weekend, so go and catch that. But guys, we will be around with some international action. We'll find something to talk about for you. As always, you can find us on Twitter at Italian Anglo Pod. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads at Anglo-Italian Pod. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button down here. Leave a comment. And if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating. Give us a review. It really, really helps with visibility, and we would forever be in your debt. So thank you, guys. We'll see you next time. As always, see you later.
Ciao, ciao.